What would Stonehenge have sounded like 4,000 years ago? How can we make it easier to hear public announcements in our train stations and airports? And why is it so important to look after the archive recordings we have and to make sure we capture the words and the sounds around us now for future generations? These are just some of the issues being looked at by a diverse group of researchers who've come together to help us make the most of sound as a vital part of our heritage and to make the best use of sound to enhance our everyday lives. This recording brings together some of the key players to explain more about the work they're involved in.
My name's Dr. Damien Murphy and I work in the audio lab in the Department of Electronics at the University of York, and I'm leading the Improving Heritage Experience Through Acoustic Reality and Audio Research cluster, or AHRC as it's much more succinctly called. And what we're looking at is how science and heritage work together in the area of heritage, particularly through the role of audio and acoustic research and technology. There's three areas. There's sound and the heritage experience more generally, and what that is about is exploring the various different ways that we use sound as part of our experience and understanding of whatever heritage is, whether that's an old building or a train or a sound archive. And everybody has a different understanding, a different way of using or acting or interacting with sound in that particular context. Then we've got some more specific aspects of the cluster. There's sound as a heritage object, and that's thinking about actually the role of real audio recordings, about sound archiving, capturing oral history, oral tradition, how we work with those resources then to preserve them for future generations. And then the third part of the cluster is focusing on virtual acoustics and auralization, and that's thinking about, well, I guess people have an idea of what virtual reality is about, the idea of placing yourself in an environment that you perceive to be real, but we can think of that just in terms of the acoustics and acoustic reality, giving someone something over headphones that's different from what they're hearing in the everyday world and convincing them that what we're presenting them with is a reality. So that could be walking into, from the point of view of heritage, again, walking into a ruined cathedral or castle and hearing it as it was, in the heyday of its use 500 or 5,000 years ago, and really being immersed in what that space would have been like when it was used as it was intended.
Whisper to me, honey, you'll be mine. Way down yonder in the old cornfield.
This is an example of a recording that we've made that involves a barbershop, so a 4-part choral group, and York Minster. The recording that you've heard, although it sounds like we've got that barbershop placed in the middle of York Minster, of course that event never actually happened. So the barbershop were recorded in our anechoic chamber back in our audio lab at the university, and an anechoic chamber is an environment that has no acoustic. So you go in there and you hear no reflections from the walls. It's a completely what we call dry environment, so very artificial sounding but great for making good quality recordings.
Whisper to me, honey, you'll be mine. Way down yonder in the old cornfield. For you, I'll pine.
So we recorded our barbershop in there, and then we took the acoustic measurements of York Minster, which we made late one night in the middle of winter when there was nobody around. That acoustic measurement is the equivalent of walking into a space and clapping your hands, and if it's a big echoey space you can hear that sound die away. So we can capture that hand clap, call it an acoustic fingerprint perhaps. We do it a bit more rigorously than that, and then we can take the sound of the barbershop, we play it through the acoustic fingerprint of York Minster, and that's the result you've just heard. I promise you the barbershop were never in the Minster at any point.
Meet me in the shade of the old tree. My
It's about listening and using our ears and not having to rely on our visual senses so much, because we can impart something more when we just think about listening. The example you just heard here is Coventry Cathedral. Now, this is actually old Coventry Cathedral, St Michael's Cathedral as it was known, still is known actually, and it was destroyed in the war, so at the moment it's just a shell, it's just the outer buildings and the spire. And we were asked a few years ago, as part of a project that was working with visually impaired youngsters, to put an audio tour together that recreated the sound of Coventry Cathedral as it would have been about 500 years ago. And of course, whereas if you're working with a real space, like for instance York Minster or another similar space, it doesn't have to be a cathedral, it could be something much smaller, it could be a concert hall. It exists, and if it exists, then you can go in there and you can take your measurements. If the space doesn't exist anymore as it was originally used, then you need to tackle the problem in a different way. So with the sound of Coventry Cathedral, we actually built a computer model. And with the computer model, which is kind of, it looks like a graphical version of what it would have looked like 500 or 600 years ago, and then we can actually calculate how sound moves in around in that space, and we can do the same measurement process that we would do if it existed in the real world, but just inside the computer we get the same acoustic fingerprint. And what you hear then is the example of, again, a small choir singing plain chant in this example, as they would about 500 years ago, in the sound of Coventry Cathedral as it would have been heard back then.
My name is Louise Kay Wilson. I'm an artist and a doctoral student at the University of Derby. I'm based in Huddersfield, and my involvement was really through knowing Damien Murphy. I came across his work through a Radio 4 programme, I think it was about 3 years ago, something like that, and I was fascinated by his work in reconstructive acoustics. So he's always been in the back of my mind with his particular research, and I've been fascinated by this notion of being able to use technology to somehow listen to the past. And we've been talking about a project that we're currently undertaking up at in Scotland on the Falkland Estate in Fife, for which we've been wonderfully lucky in getting Damien involved to come and do some acoustic mapping and measuring for us, which will then lead on to the production of a series of large-scale temporary sound works on the estate. We made a piece in April last year for Falkland Palace, which was made specifically for a one-night event called The Sound of the Deer, which was a celebration or a marking of the history of the estate as a royal hunting park. And we made a piece which is essentially a soundtrack for this very cinematic 17th century Dutch tapestry in the Tapestry Gallery. So we created an 8-channel soundtrack, and we sourced all the sounds within the Kingdom of Fife. So we went to zoos, we went to menageries, we went to farms, archery centres, falconry centres.
Says Johnny for my benison to the green woods, gang, to the green woods, gang.
We got a wonderful old AV presentation in the 60s of the sort of rushing season sounds and horns and so on. And we also worked with a sort of well-known Scottish folk singer called Sheena Wellington. And she sang a sort of old hunting song, which we were then able to patch into this piece and make this very, very layered piece, which was very spatial. As you walk the length of the tapestry, which I think is about 30 metres, and this would be at dusk. And people were given a torch as they first came in, so they could then pick out little details within this tapestry, whilst behind them was this very immersive piece. But essentially they were mixing it themselves. They could walk to and fro, backwards and forwards, hear little snatches and go back to things and make connections. What was very nice was a lot of people who'd known the tapestry very well were finding details that they'd never noticed before, that the sound was alerting them to sort of visual elements within the tapestry.
My name's Richard Ranft and I'm head of the Sound Archive at the British Library. We're based in London and we're the Department of Sound, if you like, for the British Library. So the British Library's got, obviously world-class collections of books, manuscripts, maps and so on. The Sound Archive really does for sound what the rest of the library does for printed published books and unpublished manuscripts. And we have something like 3.5 million sound recordings from the invention of sound recordings in the late 19th century to the latest chart hits.
From the elegy written in a country churchyard by Thomas Gray. The curfew tolls the knell of parting day. The lowing herd winds slowly o'er the lea. The ploughman homeward plods his weary way and leaves the world to darkness and to me.
Sound is an extremely powerful medium for conveying a sense of space and a sense of time. So with a sound recording, if it's properly put across to a listener, you can actually transport that person to another continent or another place in time within a few moments of listening to a sound recording. We have a very large collection of authenticated sounds. So one thing we're interested in the cluster is how our materials can be used as authentic sounds from the past. I think it's very important people recognise it's an important part of our culture, the sound world we live in, and it's important we document that now for the benefit of future generations. So sound can really convey the essence of a place. It's a time-based medium. It also can evoke extremely strong memories. We've got lots of recordings from all over the planet, quite frankly, and people can come in and they can listen to the sound of a rainforest or a desert at night, and it may be a place they visited 10, 20 years ago, and they're immediately transported back to there. In some ways, it can be much more powerful than an image, even a moving image.
I'm Rupa Patel. I'm based at the University of Huddersfield, where I'm a lecturer in music technology. My research is in the acoustics and music of prehistory. I'm interested in archaeoacoustics, which is using a study of the acoustics and sound of a site to learn more about it. And I'm particularly working on the acoustics of Stonehenge, this great iconic monument. One of the ways we approached things was to use a digital model. So we used a piece of software called Odeon, which allows us to take a visual model, a VR computer model, and drop it into a piece of software that is designed for architects to design concert halls so they can find out what a concert hall might sound like. And we used it in this case to find out what Stonehenge might have sounded like 4,000 years ago. So if I play this sound example, you'll hear somebody clapping, but the sound of someone clapping placed in the centre of Stonehenge 4,000 years ago and using the software to simulate what it would have sounded like, to add artificially the acoustics of the sound. So what you can hear in that is you kind of hear two claps. You hear, and actually you should just be hearing clap, 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 very simple straight claps, but you hear lots of echoes because Stonehenge was full of echoes. The sound bounced off different walls, different stones, different places. And then we discovered that in America, at a place called Mary Hill, there is a full-size concrete reconstruction of Stonehenge. And it was accurate enough to give us an understanding of roughly what the acoustics would be like, the basic acoustic principles and effects in the space. One of the things we discovered when we were there is if you play some very specific frequencies, low frequencies, below the normal range of human hearing, you get some very interesting sounds. We'd found some evidence in some of the writings of Thomas Hardy to say that there was this low frequency booming. It's mentioned in Test of the D'Urbervilles, and we'd found an interview in a newspaper article. So we made some very low frequencies, and we found particular frequencies that made the whole place ring as though you were rubbing your finger around a very large wine glass or blowing over the top of a bottle. So you got this kind of low resonant sound. It's called a mode of resonance, or modal response, at low frequencies. And it's so low that it equates to a very fast rhythm, about 150 beats per minute, so a very kind of fast percussive rhythm. So we played this rhythm into the space, and that made the place ring. This is the effect of a drum beat going bum 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 bum, a very simple drum beat. But as you walk through the space, the acoustics are so powerful and it rings so much that you hear something that sounds like a bass synthesizer going wah, 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 bah, 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 boo, 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 getting louder and quieter and changing sound because of the resonance of the space. You can hear it's a drum beat now. This is what it sounds like. Now, if someone in the space had done some drumming or percussive noises at that speed, then you would quite possibly have excited that resonance and heard this weird bass sound. It can give us an understanding of perhaps what it felt like to be in a space, or what might have occurred in the space. And also because we're going back to a time where there was no writing, where the visual was not more powerful than sound. And in fact, because history would be passed on verbally by speaking, hearing things would have been perhaps more important, or as important at least, than the visual. Whereas nowadays with television and everything else, we're very dominated by visual things. The study of sound in prehistory and in history is quite new. There's quite a lot to discover just looking at sound on its own. It's going to contribute to our overall understanding of this heritage monument. And sound can generally do that. It can add an extra dimension.
My name is Sebastian Jerome. I work for Acoustics, and as such I am an acoustic designer. I've been working for many years on different type of projects, mainly performing art related and education related. Education, I mean the design of new schools or university buildings. What we are trying to do is to demonstrate the importance of sound at every level. When we design a concert hall, we want to show to our client that the concert hall will sound somewhere not far from, or even better if we can, the Musikvereinssaal in Vienna or the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam. We do the same for the importance of intelligibility of a public building, like an airport or station. You can save lives with that.
The train approaching platform 2 is the 9:46 train to Milan. The train approaching platform 2 is the 9:46 train to Milan.
The King's Cross disaster almost 20 years ago happened because people didn't know which gate to go. So the importance of good design and intelligibility of a public address and voice alarm system is crucial. And being able to demonstrate that to a client, to tell him, look, you have to do this, because otherwise, if you don't do this, I put absorption in that space, you're going to have too much reverberation, therefore you're going to have too much noise in there when the train comes in or whatever. And the public address and voice alarm won't be intelligible. So that's the purpose of our realization, to demonstrate design.
My name is Joe Savage. My role here is Display Content Manager, which means I lead the temporary exhibitions and the displays within the National Railway Museum. The cluster is looking at how acoustics work within a museum setting or a heritage setting. This is hugely important for us at the National Railway Museum because, of course, railways are such a sensory experience for anyone travelling, anyone remembering journeys they've been on. That's something that doesn't really come across at the moment at the National Railway Museum, but is something that we're very much planning to bring into the experience for the visitor. We're currently planning a major redevelopment of our Great Hall. This is a vast space that is currently filled with awe-inspiringly big objects. However, at the moment, there isn't a coherent story that links those objects together in a narrative about how railways have impacted on our world, our lives, and our culture. We feel that by the introduction of sound and the introduction of light, we can create a journey for the visitor that takes them through that sensory experience. And we really hope that the cluster will be able to start looking at different applications of sound that we can put into our displays.
My name's Sarah May. I work as an archaeologist in the Research Department of English Heritage. I'm interested in getting involved in the cluster and happy about the cluster because I have a lot of interest and a lot of questions about sound in the past, but I don't have any technical expertise in how we might study sound. So while I've been able to explore some of these ideas from an archaeological theory point of view and indeed do some experimentation, I'm very excited to have people who can actually steer me in the right direction on the theoretical perspectives within acoustics and also on the technical aspects of modelling. My biggest project that I've been involved with is experimentation work at Silbury Hill. We were doing a much larger conservation and archaeological excavation project at the hill, and we did some community participation and modelling work on the acoustics of the site. There were some suggestions that the site was used for ritual, but one of the obvious key elements of any ritual is the sounds associated with it, whether that be drumming, singing, chanting. There's always going to be some kind of sound associated with any ritual. We wanted to get at what kinds of sounds could be heard at different places and what that might mean for what kinds of rituals could have taken place. We did 2 different strands on this project. The first was modelling perspective, where we used noise mapping software designed for environmental impact assessment just to get a sense of how far sound would carry from the top of the hill. And we found that it carried much further than we might have expected, largely in a southerly direction, and that this is just to do with the nature of the hill and the surrounding landscape. When we went out and we did a community participation exercise, we had performers on the top of the hill, community members in the landscape. We found that actually it was even further than the modelling had suggested, and also that there were interesting features like how well we knew the performers mattered to how well you could hear it. Also, how well the performers knew they could be heard changed the way their performance was. Other things like the element of surprise. People could be heard before they were seen, the element, therefore, of announcement involved as well. There are lots of different kinds of experiences that we found through the community participation work that we couldn't have picked up with modelling.
Success for the cluster is about bringing together new collaborations and new projects. I think the work we've done so far, we've already brought people together. We're passionate about what we do, and we can see that passion shared in the other people that we've been meeting as part of the cluster. Our job more widely is to disseminate that to people outside of the world of sound and acoustics and audio heritage so that they can become enthused and realise its importance. The real success for the cluster is going to be moving beyond what's initially quite a short project to really kind of build those collaborations and build those kind of flagship and iconic projects that really kind of convince people that sound and the use of acoustics is a fundamental part of both heritage but also looking forward into the future as well.
The Research Cluster is part of the Science and Heritage programme, which is funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council and the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. You can find out more by visiting www.heritagescience.ac.uk.